Good evening, and welcome to our inaugural presentation of ACC Unedited. I'm Ed Fry. I'm a cardiologist in Indianapolis and president of the ACC, and I'm delighted this evening to have a great panel with us to discuss a number of different topics. And today we're joined by Katie Berlacher, who is Assistant Professor of Medicine at UPMC, Director of the Heart Center at Magee Women's Hospital, Associate Director for Education, and the Program Director for the Cardiology Fellowship there. Most of you also know that Katie is one of the co-directors of ACC 2023 and really is doing a great job and has been long involved in lifelong learning for the college. And as many of you know her, she's also an avid exerciser, runner, biker. Hard to keep up with her. So, Katie, thank you for being here. And Andy Cates, who is professor of medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. Where is that? Oh, that's in St. Louis. That's right. And he's the program director for the Cardiology Fellowship Program, Associate Chief of Education. And on his CV, I noted that he had a long list of best doctors in St. Louis. I think that went back till you were 18 years old or so. So you were jumping the gun there. And as all of you know, Andy was also recently the director of ACC 2020 and 2021, really challenging times in terms of having running the meetings, but did an outstanding job. And we're also joined this evening by Dr. Ricky Nieves, who is a third-year fellow at UPMC. And he'll tell us a little bit about what he's going to go into, but spoiler alert, it involves imaging, and we'll be continuing at UPMC. And Dr. Chrissy Mikova, who is at Washington University, and just had confused me a little bit earlier, is that she had gone to medical school at University of Washington, so in the state of Washington, and had done her internal medicine at University of Michigan and cardiology fellowship, general cardiology fellowship at UPMC, and is now a first-year electrophysiologist. So, I said UMPC, I'm sorry, at Washington University, of course. We've got too many Washington University members here. And full disclosure, I did all my training at Washington University from medical school through faculty years, so it gets confusing. So with that, I'd like to really sort of kick it off to Ricky and Chrissy to fill us in a little bit about yourself. So maybe Chrissy, tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your experiences before college, and then your medical training. Tell us a little bit about yourself before you became a fellow.
Sounds great. And I'll try not to use up the full hour. But so I'm actually originally from Bulgaria. And so my family immigrated here when I was 9. And so I grew up mainly in Arizona, went to undergrad there at Arizona State University, and I studied chemical engineering. But I always was really interested in medicine. I have family members in medicine, so I always really respected them, wanted to do what they did essentially. And so that was kind of always what I thought my path was going to be. And then ultimately I did a year of research in medical school at the University of Washington. And I really liked learning about everything. So internal medicine seemed like the right fit, but I really liked the pumps and pipes, and cardiology drew my interest. And ultimately it was just the enigma of electrophysiology and how logical it really is. And that really interested me. And so that's where I am now. I'm really happy to be entering my final year of training, PGY 8, finishing up electrophysiology in 2023.
Wow, great. Fascinating. And maybe we'll come back to the story about coming to the United States from another country, which I think is an interesting angle. Ricky, tell us a little bit about your path to medicine and where you grew up and your background, college, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm originally from Florida, actually. I grew up in a combination of Florida, Puerto Rico, and Delaware. My family's all from Puerto Rico and Cuba. And but We moved up to Delaware when I was in high school, and then I ended up going to the University of Delaware. I studied neuroscience and Spanish literature, and I found the combination of the humanities and sciences was only best exemplified by medicine, so that kind of drew me in. And then in medical school, I ended up, I didn't know what I wanted to do for the longest time. I think I liked everything. I thought I was going to be a surgeon for the longest time. And then I liked ED, and then I liked all this other stuff. And then I landed on medicine, and cardiology kind of ended up being the one field that I felt that brought everything together, and the understanding of physiology and being able to apply it. And then more recently, imaging, I again had the same thing in cardiology. Katie knows that I end up liking just about everything. I like too many things. But I found imaging to be, and specifically cardiac MRI, to be something that you can answer so many questions now, and the technology is only getting better, and it's only going to get better. So I'm in my third year now, and I'll be starting a cardiac MRI and CT in July at UPMC.
Great. Congratulations.
Mhm.
Well, let's turn to your program directors now. Katie, tell us a little bit about what took you to become a program director and to be so engaged in education. Both you and Andy really have built your careers on education. Tell us a little bit about kind of what drew you there and what of the many rewards you've achieved through there or derived in terms of experience.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. I mean, I have to say, it's because of fellows like Chrissy and Ricky that make us happy in our jobs and are the most rewarding, in all honesty. I'm not sure that I knew that going into it. I really was interested in medical education because I thought we were doing it wrong. When I was going through medical school, I was like, man, this doesn't make any sense. I'm kind of falling asleep in classes, and I don't really want to sit in a long lecture for 8 or 9 hours a day. There's got to be a better way to do this. And so I started in med school. I did something called problem-based learning pathway, which back then was its own separate pathway at Ohio State. And that I didn't go to lecture class my first 2 years of medical school. I really did small group learning the entire time. And after that, I figured out how I learned. I figured it wasn't the standard way that school is structured. And then I was like, man, we should probably think about this. Maybe I should get a little bit more training. And so during residency, I was the chief resident, and that was really kind of the thing that sealed it all, because as a program director, we think that there's a lot of education, and there is a lot of education in our day-to-day lives, but there's also a lot of administration and leadership and organization that's not truly education. And so being a chief resident really allowed me to understand that. I actually like the management side of things. And so then I continued to love it. I am lucky to have grown up in a family that had a cardiologist as a father and a mother who was an elementary school teacher. And so I think that at the end of the day, that was the best way to combine the two of them. But it is truly a gift. I say every year at graduation, maybe it gets old, but it is my dream job. I said that a long, long time ago, and it still remains my dream job. It's just a joy.
That's great perspective, and I'm sure you feel the same with when I'm around fellows in our program. I know I get smarter. I know I learn probably more from them than they learn from me, and so it's a two-way street. Andy, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your
So
pathway.
I started a little bit before Katie did. I've got to learn to actually not follow her in my talking here. So a couple things. First, just to reiterate what she said, working with fellows like Christy and Ricky makes this so important. It's why we do what we do. I came to MedEd a little bit later in my career, earlier than Katie did by age, but later in my career by years, I should say, on calendar years. But when I finished my fellowship program, I knew I was a general cardiologist. I stayed in an academic setting because I really liked the academic environment. But I didn't have any formal med ed training. It was the opportunity to become associate program director maybe a year or two after I started. I wanted to work with fellows, and I wanted to do more than just teach. Like we all teach in an academic setting, either bedside rounds that part was fine, but I really wanted to be more involved in really working with the fellows in a different way with developing the curriculum, but also kind of the overall management of administrative work involved, and also building something and building a program. And we had a formal program, but I think the opportunity to build it and guide it in a certain way, and most importantly, though, working with the fellows on it closely, I think really made it such a rewarding experience. And importantly, I think one of the goals was back in the back 15 years ago, I think the whole environment of med ed and the collaborative environment that we all see now, and I think I speak for Katie as program director, what we love what we do is working with our fellows, getting our fellows to work together and working with other program directors. I think being able to help build at a higher level also, at a national level or even global level, I think makes this just such a wonderful job and a wonderful experience. But taking one step back, I think why this has been so rewarding and why I've done this for as long as I have is exactly, we just had our fellows graduation dinner last Saturday night. We were talking about this before we started, and seeing the development. So it's one thing if you work with a fellow on a rotation and you're done, you say, well, it's great, I worked with him or her and they did a good job, and you move on. We get to see this develop, right? So year after year, we say we get older and they kind of stay the same age, but it's this wonderful progression that we see from year 1 to year 3 or beyond. And Christy's been with us now for this is starting your 5th year. And it's wonderful to see as fellows who are already mature more and just grow. And we're lucky we get to work with phenomenal people, but seeing them even get better, it's such a great thing. So I think that I said at the end of our fellows, and I've got the best job in the world because I get to work with each one of these fellows in a different way throughout their training. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. So
Great.
answer the
A
question.
lot of very interesting and important concepts and topics brought up, and Chrissy, as an electrophysiology fellow now, and a woman in electrophysiology, that's not common, and is unfortunately underrepresented in our profession. Talk a little bit about kind of your perception of your role as a woman in medicine, and a woman in particularly in electrophysiology, and what your words of advice would be to others who might want to take the same path.
Yeah, so I think I always thought electrophysiology was very interesting, and I thought about it as a career at initially in internal medicine residency, and kind of explored that on a rotation there and got exposed to the lab. But I think what really kind of made it seem like something that I could do and I could really enjoy was being in the lab here at my institution currently, and just and I don't know if that I think that makes a difference for anybody, but as a woman in EP, I think it made a big difference for me, just like the first day essentially being a general fellow and expressing some interest and just being told like you are always welcome back here if you're in the cath lab and you're bored, just come on back. We're having so much fun back here. You should join us. And I said, yeah. And then it's been great. So to me, I feel like I got lucky in the sense that I found mentors that, you know, were 100% inclusive and very enthusiastic about what they did and wanted to instill that in me. And I already had a little bit of that, but honestly, at every juncture along the way, I have sort of questioned whether, is this the time to stop training? I have a family, I have other priorities, and it, ultimately, I think for me, I just really want a job that I enjoy day to day, and I so far I feel very lucky to be down the path that will help me attain that, I suppose. And a lot of that has been kind of maybe opportunity and luck and finding some mentors along the way.
I think that's a key aspect of the mentors, and obviously having Katie as a mentor, I'm sure was a great example. But are any obstacles that you came across, or any obstacles that you see, or anything you would change to make it better or easier for your fellow fellows and particularly fellow women in the future?
I would say um, what I've experienced both sides of it, and I think as somebody, the EP lab can be a pretty intimidating place right off the bat, and I think this is mainly for people interacting with fellows rather than for fellows themselves, because I think we're not quite as empowered in some ways to advocate for that. But in terms of people working with fellows or female fellows interested in electrophysiology, I think one thing that I encountered was, um, being met with, this is a very technically challenging field. Like, do you play video games? What's your dexterity like? This was before I was even a cardiology fellow, so I found that a very strange sort of introduction to the field, like being questioned about like my aptitude to do it in 5, 6 years or what have you. And on the other end of it was, like I said, my experience at WashU, which was, you're always welcome back here, and this stuff is really interesting and you should learn how to do it. So I suppose that's more advice for mentors than fellows, but for fellows, I think, envision what job you want, and like what problems you like solving every day and what you like doing day to day, be it procedures, or a mix of procedures and clinic visits, and then pursue that, because ultimately, to be doing that hopefully for decades to come.
Yeah, well, that's great. Ricky, one of the other subjects that that comes up often is we're in this era of hyper subspecialization now, and you're going into imaging, and there may even be further paths you take, such as cardio-oncology or sports medicine with that imaging background. Talk a little bit about kind of how, number one, what made you decide that you should go further in your training, and also um, uh, any issues in terms of, is that a difficult decision? Is it disruptive, or is it something that it just came to you very easily? And how can others make those decisions?
Yeah. So I was like, it's a, I was one of those people who ended up liking a lot of things. So I was kind of trying to figure out my place, but I ended up really trying to I found quite a love for general cardiology, and trying to, I like seeing as many patients as possible and being in the outpatient setting as well. But I found imaging, and specifically why I landed on imaging was because I felt like imaging was one of the fields with subspecialties within cardiology that kind of touched on all the others. So I get to, like, in cardiac MRI, we do have patients, for ablation, scar burden, those kinds of things. Or if I'm sending, stress tests at the same time, so I'm talking to the cath lab, I'm talking to the EP lab, I'm talking to heart failure. So I found that imaging kind of blended that, being able to touch all the other fields of cardiology, but also being able to continue to see patients in the clinic. And being able to really apply cardiology on a very broad basis, which I really came to love quite a bit. When it came to adding a year, yeah, I was thinking about it, and it's kind of hard to say this in Chrissy's space, again, because I don't have to do 2 years; it's one. But yeah, it did run through my mind, PGY 6 now to 7 next year. Especially when some of my friends have already graduated and they're on their attending jobs, and they're doing their things. But I really found that, when it came to the way I see my career path, I love general cardiology. I like being in that setting, but I also kind of like a little niche, just to kind of like, it's almost like an escape away from it a little bit, so I can kind of flip my mind into a different setting. But yeah, I did some thinking about it, and then talked to Katie, looked into other programs, and then yeah, just decided to go for it. So
Great. One of the other concepts, and it may have been forget who brought it up, but maybe Andy, you'd address, people have different learning styles and learning aptitudes, and yet, obviously, medical training is a pretty prescribed entity. Can you talk a little bit about how those considerations related to differences in learning and perhaps teaching people to learn in different ways and how that might apply within a cardiology fellowship? What's been your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Yeah, and I think we've come to realize how fellows and learners learn differently, even more so now in the midst of our pivot to some virtual education in the midst of COVID. So I think we've learned that people do learn different ways, either the synchronous and asynchronous learning. And as we've tried to develop our curriculum, again, I'd say early on, developing our curriculum just with our standard in-person lectures, we've come to realize that that doesn't work for all of our fellows. That some benefit from learning, from more self-motivated learning. Certainly when it comes to imaging, we found that most of our fellows, we really have come to appreciate that fellows learn better with an imaging and one-on-one. I think where we learned significantly in the midst of COVID that the remote echo reading doesn't really work well, and that it's the in-person touch that goes a long way, I think, in helping fellows learn from that perspective. I think we've come to learn also that the fellows in general really do value in-person learning in general, and that's been kind of reinforced as we're getting back together in the midst of kind of reemergence from COVID.
Great, great. Katie, you've been, very active in so many parts of education, but, clearly a very important piece is understanding for not just fellows, but for faculty and everybody, the issue of work-life balance and how that translates to clinician well-being. Tell us a little bit about how you think about these things as you incorporate that into a training program, and what lessons do you want to convey to your fellows? You may be on mute there, Katie.
Thank you. I was going to say, Ricky can check me on this. We've been talking about well-being and wellness and burnout for a long time, and my fellows know that I hate all three of those words because they sound hokey. And 5-6 years ago, we were talking about do we bring puppies in, which we did at ACC, and it was great. But let's be honest, that doesn't help our work well-being. And I think Ricky, who has stayed here, we've done a number of different things at noon conferences and bought lunches and all those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, I think we've all learned with trial and error that those are actually not what well-being is. Well-being is really about having a community and knowing that you're valued and supported. And so we try to talk about that on a regular basis. We acknowledge a lot of our feelings, which again sounds really hokey and touchy-feely, but Ricky also knows that I exude my emotion so that everybody feels comfortable exuding theirs, and that it's okay to feel sad and mad and tired and angry, in addition to all of the other positive emotions. So we give a lot of grace in our fellowship, and I think we do that well. Ricky, you can comment on that, but we are really open about saying, hey, I need a minute. I need a couple hours this afternoon break from consults to go to a therapist appointment to do, I need a half day out because I'm burning out. Can we talk about that? We talk about physical fitness and how regular physical fitness is really helpful. We do that as a team. So we have an annual Heart Month workout together at a gym that Ricky and I actually both belong to. So there's a lot of different ways that we do it. It's not just one thing, but I do think that the thread is the community feeling and the constant acknowledgement that this is normal and it takes effort every single day to be well.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe before we go on, I just would like to remind those who are on the webinar, please enter any questions or comments that you'd like for us to address in the chat box as we move along. So maybe Ricky, you maybe respond to that a little bit, and maybe I'll just give an editorial comment that I think a lot of wellness really is derived from also engagement and professionalism. And maybe talk a little bit about how those things which aren't really in a textbook, they're not in a, they're not on a board review course, but are critically important within your training. Talk a little bit about how you're exposed to those and what you've gotten out of it.
Yeah. So to start off, yeah, I completely agree that one thing that Katie has done, at least in our program, is really make it a very comfortable thing that if somebody is having issues, whatever it may be. Most recently in our program, there have been a lot of new parents. So when we see each other, I actually saw one of my co-fellows. Yeah. One of my co-fellows falling asleep one day, and we told him it's okay, you can go take a nap, we'll take care of it for now. So really making a community where we feel, if somebody has something that's going on, whatever it may be, our chiefs that we've always had have always been very open. And it's been one of those things where it's not frowned upon, and we have a jeopardy system if it needs to be used. Aside from that, yes, like when it comes to those events, we do have multiple things. We have a Bruce Protocol Challenge we do every year as a little competition amongst ourselves. We go to the gym. And we have a lot of things that kind of COVID put a damper on some of things, but once things started slowing down, and it's always been that sense of belonging. And I think it runs through, and it really makes everything, just nicer to be around. It's fun to be around. When it comes to the professional meetings, yeah, whether it be at conferences or with our grand round speakers, actually. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is that our program has actually made an opportunity to get after grand rounds to be able to speak fellows directly to the grand round speaker. Whether that's an interest in the field that you're particularly interested in, or a topic they brought up, but it's kind of fellows with speakers that I think has been a very unique opportunity that I've gotten, and I've gotten some great professional development from that, and just opportunities that I would not have had otherwise. But yeah, so yeah, so many opportunities I really can't say them all now. So, but yeah, it's been great.
Well, that's a good position to be in. Chrissy, one of the challenges I think in making that transition from being a trainee to being a faculty or being in practice is the understanding the sort of organizational aspects of practice, and whether it's managerial or operational or non-clinical competencies. Can you speak to what opportunities you get through your training to, learn those things either by osmosis or intentionally, or opportunities to gain additional experience to help, as you think about the next steps in your career and how you'll be um, practicing in the very near future?
Yeah, so I would say from an EP perspective, I've definitely been very clinically focused and just trying to learn that. But certainly, there are considerations of, when I'm going to be the primary operator, what that would look like, and what do changes in Medicare billing mean for me. That's one thing that was relevant to the EP community recently that made me think, maybe I should be paying more attention to these things. From my perspective, I'd like to be in academic medicine and be involved in teaching and research. And at my institution, I have had some exposure to the clinical operational part of things. I'm doing this Innovation Lab Fellowship, which is kind of combined between our bigger hospital system, Barnes Jewish Christian, and the university physicians group. And so I feel like, that the clinical operational part of things is not the emphasis of this time, but I feel like I've learned a little bit more of the lingo, if you will, on some of the considerations that the institution as a whole thinks about and prioritizes, and how like what I think is important for patients, how I need to present that in a language that's understood to people higher up the chain, if you will. And so that's some exposure that I think I found useful along the way. We'll see how relevant it is right off the bat, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd really like to ask both Andy and Katie that kind of that same question because it becomes more and more of an important skill set to learn, whether you're in academics or whether you're in independent or integrated practice. What are the venues that trainees can have to, and even early career faculty to gain those skills? How do you incorporate that into your programs?
Ed, you're right. This is one thing that Chrissy's been actually nice in her comments. We don't do that well. That's something we've talked about, would love to do better. And there are resources, and I know ACC has resources that are available for some of the non-clinical competencies that we've tried to put in. We've talked and are trying to create a leadership program and curriculum for our fellowship program, and that's something that's underway. But we struggle with the best way to do this and get it to be part of the program. Chrissy did mention, though, there are ways, and many times is during third year or and so especially training. Chrissy's done a great job in taking advantage of her opportunity with the Innovations Lab through BJC and her experience during this year. But what we've done better, I think, is for our early careers, there's opportunities within WashU and BJC to participate in leadership training, which I think has helped. But I definitely think that's something that we need to focus on and do better and more organized way for our fellows. So there's work that we need to do there.
Katie, how about at UPMC? What's going on there?
Yeah, we do a fair amount. It's a little bit more piecemeal. We do have some financial noon conferences that will have financial advisors come in and talk to the fellows about that. We open a lot of our faculty meetings and operational meetings to our fellows, and anytime that we're doing any sort of change. So like last year, I think Ricky, it was last year, maybe a year and a half ago now, I forget. We changed our heart failure services and split them into 2 heart failure services. So we have more of a VAD and transplant service, and then heart failure and pulmonary hypertension service, and just lots of patients, and how we were going to do that, and who was going to see which consults when, and who was going to cover and write notes and whatnot. And we brought the fellows in, right? Like it wasn't just the heart failure attendings that were making that decision with me. I was like, we need to bring the fellows and they're going to have opinions about this. And then halfway through the year, when it wasn't perfect, we reiterated, right? There was some other tweaking that needed to happen. So we really bring them to the table. I think it's very similar to the model that ACC uses, which I really like, which is having FIT representatives, CV team representatives, early career representatives, right? And just when we think about diversity, a lot of the times we think about that word meaning race and ethnicity and sex and gender, right? But really it's all of the roles, it's all of the ages, it's, all of those things. And so we like to think about that on every single committee that we have or change that we're making. Hey, did we include the chief fellows? Hey, did we include somebody who's going into, imaging fellowship when we make a change to the MRI process? Because it matters, and they actually come up with much better ideas. We actually, for COVID, we put together a COVID committee, and it was mostly fellows because they had the better ideas than we did with boots on the ground. So, they're essential.
Right. Well, that's a great segue into a question in the chat box from Gene Sherman, and great question. Gene says, I'm a mentor of several medical students applying for cardiology fellowship. Almost all are international medical graduates or underrepresented minorities or both. How do programs today work to create diversity in your training programs? Well, I guess we'll start with the program directors, Andy and Katie. Maybe you can address that, and then be very interested to hear the perspective of Chrissy and Ricky.
Go
Katie,
ahead.
yeah. So what we've done from a recruitment standpoint, which is I think where it really starts, although the challenge with recruiting sometimes, if you're not diverse, then recruiting diversity can be challenging. But we've tried to do really is being as intentional as we can in trying to promote the diversity that we have and sharing that with our applicants from the first step, which is the application review, we had an APD for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and having that person and others who are involved with DEI be involved in reviewing the initial applications to make sure that I think that we are as inclusive as possible and making sure that we don't miss any really potentially good quality applicants. And then highlighting during the interview process, really, I think what makes us unique, but also how we can continue to grow and become more diverse by recruiting diversely. I think that goes a long way. And again, highlighting some of the strengths of our program, again, trying to recruit more diversely.
Yeah, I think a key point there, Andy, that you make is that, and we see this in the statistics, it is very difficult to promote diversity when our mentors and our role models and our the faculty and teachers, they have to have the diversity too in order to attract the diverse fellows and applicants. Katie, how about at UPMC?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Ricky to comment after me, but so we do that pretty, from a recruitment standpoint too, but I actually think that it has to be year round, kind of like the wellness. It's what you do every day, but it really is what we do every day. We talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, and we talk about when we're not getting it right. So I think one of the best ways to do this, especially when you don't have diversity of race or gender or sexuality in your own program, the best way to get better at it is to start having the hard conversations. And so that's really learning the language of diversity, equity, inclusion. It is owning when you are bad at it and being very specific about what parts you are not great at. It is constantly having grand rounds, seminars, town halls, those sorts of things. We did bias. There's a multi-institutional study that was called Bias Reduction in Internal Medicine that was led by a woman out of the University of Wisconsin, and a lot of departments of medicine took part in it. I was a facilitator for the training, and our entire division did that. So we do that. We do holistic review, not only of the fellows, but also of faculty. So when we are interviewing faculty, it is a holistic review. And then we talk about when we get it wrong. Ricky knows all the time that I am asking if there are any problems behind the scenes, if there are things going on in the labs, did anything happen recently that you want to talk about? We are a proudly diverse fellowship, but it takes a lot for us to maintain that and for everybody to feel comfortable. The other thing that we did, and I'll ask Ricky to just comment on, is we feel strongly that this is a pipeline issue, and the ACC has done a lot of pipeline programs, with most recently with the residency programs that Dr. Capers and the D&I committee is really leading with Black residents and women residents and Latinx residents, mentoring those residents. But we have a program called I Look Like a Cardiologist that we go into the high schools, and Ricky is smiling because I know that he has participated in it and loves it. And while it helps with our diversity in the long term, I actually also think that it helps with our wellness of fellows and faculty too.
That's awesome.
So it's a twofer. So Ricky, I don't know if you want to comment about I Look Like a Cardiologist.
I agree. I think at UPMC, our program, like my class is half men and half women, 4 and 4. It's looking around in my program, I see different backgrounds, different ethnicities and everything. And it's an honest effort that I think the leadership has really put into really living that message of diversity in multiple different ways. And then to speak to Katie's program, that I Look Like a Cardiologist, pretty much all the fellows get involved in it. Is really to encourage not only young women to pursue fields in science and medicine potentially, but in groups that are historically underrepresented. And all of us get involved in it, and we ended up having a good time because we actually end up learning a lot of the, we're all paired off with students specifically, and telling them our experiences, what they're interested in, and that this is a field that they could pursue very easily if they could pursue themselves, and really encouraging them to do so. But we also have a fun time just learning about like what are kids talking about these days now, and it makes us feel it gets us away old, but it gets us away from the hospital for a little bit, which is fun too. So.
Well, I think you raise very important issues. It's very hard for us to take care of the communities that we take care of if our workforce, if our profession doesn't look like the communities. I think we need to reflect them directly. Chrissy, I'm going to give you a first crack at this. This is a question from Dr. Joe Marine, who asks, in your experience and among your fellow and training colleagues, describe what's been most valuable to you about your relationship or membership in ACC, and what can the college do better to serve the needs, perhaps, of fellows in training and maybe even further upstream?
Yeah, so I think from my personal experience and my co-fellows' personal experience, one of the valuable things about being a member of the ACC is getting the opportunity to be around thought leaders in whatever field we're interested in, and kind of just being associated with that. And whether that's on a committee or in one of the specific fit sections that tend to put out very relevant and interesting articles on the website. In terms of what can be done better, let me think about that. With all things, it's kind of hard to incorporate like professional development and the into kind of daily life sometimes, just because there's so many other priorities
Mhm.
at play. But how can you fix that? I don't know yet. Certainly a variety of different opportunities like this, for example, this candid conversation at time is nice, and then maybe offering things at various time of the day in different formats to kind of incorporate something that fits your schedule and your needs at that time. That might be helpful, but not very specific.
Great. We've got a minute or two left, and maybe we'll just go around and anybody who has 2 cents in what they'd like to contribute about their training experience and training programs, and particularly how ACC can be of help. So maybe we'll go to Andy first.
So I think one thing, just to build briefly on what Chrissy said, is the idea of different communities that I think the ACC has really tried and done a good job in creating, if it's for fellows in training and general fellows in training, or if it's specific niche that they may have, or if it's your pathway that you want to follow, if it's EP or imaging, getting involved from that way, from program directors or graduate medical educators. There's communities that are involved there. There's other member sections. There's advocacy. There's all these different ways of getting involved. And even if you don't get on a committee, Ed, you brought this up earlier, I think you don't get on a committee, there's so many different ways to get involved with work groups, and you can find your niche. Chrissy, you're right, trying to find that balance, that work, that the way to take care of that plus other things is challenging. But I think finding where you can find a group, and I think it really goes a long way to becoming engaged and really good for fellow fit and member value.
Great. Katie.
I would say draw those circles. So I give a children's book at the end of graduation every year because I love children's books and they have a lot of really great themes. I have them in my office. Ricky knows. And this year I gave a book called The Circles All Around Us. And it's about this book that your circle of life starts really, really small, right? And then as you grow and have all of these different experiences, you have different circles. They overlap with other ones. They get bigger. Sometimes they get smaller. And during fellowship, you've got your circle of fellowship. You never leave that circle of fellowship, whether that's good or bad. Hopefully, most of my fellows think that it's a good circle to belong to. But I think, I didn't find the ACC until I was late in fellowship, and much more so even until really early career. Some of my best friends I found in ACC. I mean, Andy and I and a couple other program directors text on a weekly, if not, daily basis at this point, and they're my besties. So you will find your tribe, and I think use ACC to do it because it will lead you to places that you maybe didn't really expect.
Great. We literally have less than a minute, so Ricky and Christy, we're going to give you the last sound bite here. So Ricky, you go next.
Yeah, I think that the ACC offers not only educational opportunities, obviously, with everything that becomes available and is always available, but I think that the state chapters are also something that kind of offer maybe a smaller setting to pursue a lot of the educational opportunities. And I, as a FIT representative myself, I've not only learned about it, but I've also been able to learn more about the opportunities, but been able to meet a lot of people through the state of Pennsylvania, which has been awesome and just taught me things I wouldn't have known otherwise. So yeah.
Chrissy, last word.
So I think I like the breadth of the ACC, but as a subspecialist, I also like the specific areas of it. So it's great that you can join like a work group on digital health and precision medicine and like see who's interested in that and learn more about it. So that's something that I've found valuable.
Yeah, circling back to Andy's point earlier about communities, I think very important. So I think just three quick things that I would like to say and wrap up. I think Ricky, your point about getting engaged in the state chapters, really important, tremendous opportunity, probably the best leadership development experience you can have. Number two, the nominations for committees, sections, councils will be coming up during the summer and will be posted on acc.org, and people can self-nominate, and that is really the front door to a lot of the ACC opportunities. Would really encourage everybody, whether it's fellows in training or early career, to get involved. And then lastly, I would say the importance of advocacy, and especially in medical education, we really need strong advocacy to advocate for more training spots, more resources, more graduate medical education support as well. So very, very important. This has been a great discussion, really stimulating, as always humbled by interacting with fellows in training. Our profession is in good hands. And as we move forward, you're already teaching the teachers, and I would thank you for that. Thank you for being part of this inaugural on ACC Unedited. Future programs will be posted on acc.org. We certainly would love to hear suggestions that people would like to have in terms of content. And with that, we'll say good evening, and everybody stay safe. Thank you for being here.